Good morning, artists. Today, we're going to talk about linear perspective. Today is just a warm up to what we're about to do so you can start to wrap your head around what is going to be probably the most difficult project we do in here this semester. So today I want to talk to you about, who invented perspective drawing, sort of the history of it, which I'll try to make as interesting as possible so you don't fall asleep on me. I want to talk about some careers related to perspective drawing, if this is something you're interested in. We're going to take a look at 1-point perspective all the way through 7-point perspective, look at student examples, just the big picture of what we're about to do. So hope you're excited. This is one of my favorite things to do. So here we go. All right. So perspective drawing. First of all, our goal is to be able to first of all, just identify what is linear perspective. But more importantly, how can this help you to solve drawing problems? After all, that's what we really got here. We've got a white piece of paper, for example, or a white canvas. You're trying to create the illusion of depth. So it looks like someone can look into the scene. Well, we've talked about some ways to do that with foreground, background, middle ground, the illusions of space. But let's revisit that, the illusions of space. So we know some basic techniques like overlapping is going to create some space, and shading and placement, value and focus. But it's really this last one we're going to cue in on this time. This whole unit is about this one illusion of space, using lines to create the illusion that there's depth. So you've all seen this example before. A couple railroad tracks going off into the distance, which, if you were a bird flying over it, looking down, those two lines would be parallel. They don't ever touch or meet. But here in this photograph, it appears that off in the distance, they meet at a point. And we actually give that a name because it's kind of cool. They call that the vanishing point. So it appears like lines that would be parallel looks like they're going to a point. You can also see that with the railroad ties. They're also angled that way, or this fence post here, or even the tracks made by some vehicles driving on the side of the tracks, all going to that one point. It's the same with this road here. You can't walk down the road and go find the vanishing point and pick it up and put it in your pocket. It's just how we perceive things. It's our perception. So now as artists, we have to think backward. I mean, it's great to take a photo and say, hey, look, those lines look like they're going to a point. We have to start with a point and then construct lines so that we can create a scene. It's not just outdoors. This happens indoors as well. This looks like some underground subway or something, but take a look at the ceiling. There's lines that go to a point over here. The lines in the lights. You could follow these posters that are on the walls, or the lines on the floor. Any lines that would be, or really are, parallel appear to converge on a point in the distance. And that's the idea of 1-point perspective. Anything that's parallel. Think about trees. If you're laying in the middle of the woods on your back, trees grow up, vertically. And they're all parallel to one another. I mean, sure, there might be one that's falling over, but you could kind of see that these trees indeed actually are all going toward a point. And that's a point where you are looking. Similarly, if you were up in a tree stand, because maybe you're a hunter or you're looking down like a bird on a scene like this, you would see that indeed these trees, for the most part, are all going to a point right around here. So we see it all the time. Maybe you just don't stop and think about it, but lines that are parallel, like on this dock, are going to meet at a point way out here. So what I'd like to do is just kind of, so you can learn to identify where that vanishing point is, I'd like for you in just a moment to place your finger right on the screen, right where you think the vanishing point is. And then I'll count you down, 3, 2, 1, and see how close you are. All right. Really, all you need to do is follow any two lines that are going back in space and try to find where they meet. For example, if you follow my cursor here, if we look at this line in the ceiling going back in space. So we look at this line from the desk. Those two lines are going to intersect, and it appears to be right about there. Well, let's see how close I was. Yeah, right about there. All right, so here's a more difficult one. See if you can figure out where two lines, let's say the top rail, or heck, this third one down, where those two lines going back in space would intersect. Somewhere right in here. There we are. So that is the vanishing point. Easy to spot when you just look at a photograph like this, a little more difficult for us as drawers to try to reconstruct a scene like this. And understand this too. This is where you are looking, or whoever took this photograph was looking. They obviously had their camera way down low, or they were kneeling down or on their stomach taking this picture. In this case, obviously the camera was pointed way up high at these skyscrapers. So the vanishing point, you could just look at some of the lines coming off these buildings, is going to be way up high at the top of the sky. So here is an actual work of art. Some interior decorator decided to draw this bathroom scene, likely to sell it to a client so that they might, get paid. And all you simply need to do, again, is follow any two lines going back in space, not lines that are just horizontal or vertical. Those aren't going back in space, but lines like you see here on the tile, maybe one coming off of this vanity or off the ceiling where the crown molding is. You follow those lines, boom, you can find a vanishing point. All right, one final one, challenge you. There's not many points going back in space here, because if you think about it, there's lots of horizontals and lots of verticals. Some folks get confused by the diagonals. They are not really going back in space. Lines like this are, this one that leads us back this way. There's a few lines in the road here that are sort of going back in space. Ooh, right off of these little, looks like benches, there's some lines leading your eye back in space. So put your finger where you think the vanishing point might be. And in 1, 2, 3, boom, oh, over there. So all you need to do is simply follow lines going back in space to locate that vanishing point. Let's take a look at the hallway just outside my door. This is my camera that I used, and I held my camera in different places. At one point, I got right in the middle of the hallway, and I'm about 6 feet tall. And I thought, well, where's that vanishing point? Well, it's right down the middle of the hallway, about 6 feet up, on that blue door down there, right in the middle. All of the lines in the ceiling, the lockers, the locks, the floor, all going to that point. But what if I move to the side? What happens to the vanishing point? Well, it too moves to the side. The vanishing point, if you see where these lines intersect, is now on the left side of the hallway. So your vanishing point is unique to you. It's where you're looking. It's your own perspective, in a word. Maybe that's why they call it one-point perspective. If someone was standing on the other side of the wall and they were drawing this scene, theirs would look different from mine. Their vanishing point would be different. If you hold your camera up by the ceiling or you're very tall, your vanishing point is going to be a little bit higher. It's going to look a little different. Notice the lines going back in space. Or if you put your camera on the floor, well, you're going to have another unique perspective where your vanishing point is way down low. So I really want to just in these first few slides, just to get you wrapping your head around what is the vanishing point, how does it work? But believe it or not, there was a time where there was no linear perspective. Well, I guess it existed as we see it, but we didn't understand as artists how to recreate it. If we think back to, say, cave paintings, we're talking 20, 30,000 years ago, there was no interest in using lines and rulers to make things look straight. They were just putting up some decorations on their cave walls, probably for religious or ceremonial purposes or for the sake of learning. But they weren't interested in creating a realistic scene with, realistic depth. Even say 5,000 years ago in Egypt, they were interested in making things look somewhat real, but not super real. There's no real space here. Everything is flat and it's on the same frieze, is what they call it, the same plane, where everything's standing on this frieze composition. Even in Roman and Egyptian times, they weren't too different. It's a very shallow depth. Yes, you might have a little bit of overlapping, where this plant is in front of this guy's hand, or this tree is in front or behind, but there's not much sense of space and depth. Here we're looking at some from likely looks like India, maybe some Middle East country. Not a whole lot of depth. They do have overlapping going on. I like how the horses are overlapped here. The people are slightly overlapped. There's some size and placement, but there's no linear perspective. We have an Islamic piece where they're really into decoration, what they call the regular division of the plane or tessellations. Um, so there is some sense of space. We kind of feel like these folks occupy a room, but again, it's very flat, no sense of depth. In the East, here's an example where you do see some depth. You see lines going back in space. But this example, anyway, is called unidirectional or one direction. These lines going back for this rooftop or these stairs are not converging on a point. It's almost as though someone took a ruler or straight edge and made them all parallel. So nice attempt, but still not quite there. It really wasn't until, say, the Middle Ages, think 1200s, 1300s, where folks, they were already painting and drawing people, but they wanted these people to live in a believable space. Here's an example where it's kind of wonky. It doesn't quite work. It's actually not very believable that this king would be half the size of the building, and would they just go in the door and walk up three stairs and then look down at the people? It's just, there's an attempt to say, hey, we can draw architecture, but didn't quite work. Here's another example, early example from the 1300s, where this table, I mean, that's just goofy looking. It's incorrect. I mean, nice attempt. They tried to make a bunch of different items that have some perspective, but a lot of it is unidirectional or just off. The guy who gets really close back in the 1300s was a guy named Giotto. He was an Italian fella. And so the next few slides you're going to see are very religious in nature. It's not a religion lesson, it's just the birth of perspective happened in Italy and during the Renaissance, and religion was big on their mind. So, um, well, Giotto gets close. He's trying to make this ceiling look like it's realistic. And if you just look at it, you think, wow, that's pretty darn good. But if you do like we did on previous slides, take a couple lines and try to find where they meet, there's actually a few different vanishing points. So he didn't quite figure it out. And his stairs are unidirectional. They're going one direction. So nice attempt. And most people credit him as sort of the grandfather of, a linear perspective because of his attempts. But even this guy, full grown man living during the Renaissance, didn't quite get it. One of the first who really got it, maybe by accident, was a guy named Lorenzetti, another Italian fellow. And if you look at this floor here, this checkerboard or what we call a parquet floor, gets really close. Actually, it looks pretty accurate to me. There are some inconsistencies. Some of them are more rectangular instead of square, but it is believable. And these folks look like they're living in a believable space. Then Masaccio comes along. He gets it right. He's making this what's called a barrel vaulted ceiling, and all of these lines, as you can see in the diagram here, go down to a vanishing point. But there's one guy who really gets credit because he like wrote out the rules and said, here's how this is done. And the guy that really figured this out is a guy named Brunelleschi. He's trying to create this church in Florence called Santo Spirito. And you kind of need a blueprint, right? You can't just tell the workers to just slap up some rocks and columns over here and over there. So out of necessity to build this church, here's the final example, he's got to draw this stuff out. Like, how does this work? So in essence, he was one of the first to make really good blueprints. In fact, I want to show you a cool video that kind of explains how he discovered this. So let me share my screen with you. What's cool, well, I think it's cool, is that I actually got to visit this place. Well, when I was in Florence, so let me back out of here really quick. And let's go to, bear with me, stop sharing that. All right, here it comes. Check out this video. Make sure you can hear the volume. Sorry, technical glitches here. All right, here we go. I stood right there. Okay. Oop, let me go back and stop that. Hold on one sec. There we go. All right. So obviously, I find that interesting because I teach perspective, but I found it extraordinary when I got to stand right where Brunelleschi did and stare at the baptistry, knowing that this was kind of the birthplace of of perspective, and because I teach this stuff, so I get a kick out of this. But I hope you will too. So anyway, I just find it interesting that it took up until the 15th century for grown guys and gals to figure this stuff out. Now we teach it to kids in as early as third and fourth grade. But really, it did change everything. When you start to look at artwork from this point onward, not only did they understand, hey, we can use lines that go to a vanishing point to construct a realistic scene, but they would actually make the vanishing point kind of the center of the whole idea, the emphasis of the scene. So, without a religious lesson, basically, here's a biblical story of this angel saying to Mary, "Hey, you're going to have a kid, and you should name him Jesus." But what happens is it's called the Annunciation, and the most important part of the scene is right here, where the angel Gabriel is actually announcing something, and that is the vanishing point. Although it's unseen, all your attention is drawn right there. Same with this one here, this Last Supper scene. All of these lines go right down here to what is the emphasis of the work. So Leonardo da Vinci was using this. It just really changed art. Um, and hopefully it'll change your artistic set of tools that you can use. So nowadays, I mean, we just get this stuff. There's books and manuals, and you can go to YouTube and find this stuff. I mean, as early as say third or fourth grade, students are using lines that go back in space to a vanishing point. In middle school, you might have got a dose of this if you took an art class. As in middle school, you might have even learned 2-point perspective. But today, you can get online, you can check out tons of videos and take it as far as you want. I mean, things people are doing these days. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, I think, would be impressed by what we've achieved with perspective. Back in the day, it was just 1-point perspective, and folks learn how to do that. I'm going to teach you 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, as well as three. You have three different vanishing points. So once you get to three, things can look a little squished or warped. And there's 4-point perspective. We have one on the left and one on the right, and sort of a north and south one. So things look curvilinear. And there's even 5-point perspective, which we call fisheye or bubble perspective. So you have your north and south, east and west, but also a central point, something like this. So they can really make some fun and warped scenes. And it's usually my favorite way to do perspective is 4 or 5-point perspective. But it goes on. There is 6-point perspective. Oftentimes you'll see 6-point done on, say, a sphere, where people will paint on top of like a basketball. We have a north and south pole, like our Earth, and around the equator, you have 4 different points, all at 90 degrees, and then also a center point. So you could have 6 points. There's 7 points, which can be done in different ways. You might stretch it out so you have a very warped room, or you might have like that basketball I was talking about, north and south, and 4 more here, and then one in the center. So once you get beyond 7, I have seen some examples of 8 and 9, but it gets really more theoretical and strange, and I don't mess with it because it's not my kind of fun. But let me show you a few sort of masters of perspective. These are folks that have really made a name for themselves because they've got this down. First one I want to introduce you to is known as the Sidewalk Picasso, Julian Beaver. This was drawn, by the way, on a city street, on some sidewalks. It looks like he's up here on a ledge, and Batman and Robin are climbing up this building. Really what he does is a unique form of perspective where all of the lines are going down to a point, but that point is where you would stand. And if you stand right at that point, the scene looks accurate. If you're standing over here or over here, the scene doesn't make much sense. But from a unique vantage point, all the lines seem to line up, and it's called an anamorphic perspective. So he does this on the ground, and as you walk by it, it's really impressive because it looks like you're looking down into an abyss like this. Here's another one of his. Again, for these folks standing over here, or this gentleman standing over here, he sees a bunch of lines and colors, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you stand where all of these lines are going and you're right at that point, basically you become the vanishing point, it looks like a huge ice crevice. Really impressive. Another master of perspective is Mr. M.C. Escher, who we looked at earlier when it came to still lives. Here he's showing off 5-point perspective. We'll talk more about this, but basically he's got lines that are going to 5 different points, and he drew this in a mirror sphere. Here we have some 3-point perspective. It's hard to know which way is up when looking at this work. It is pretty intense. Here is a 6-point perspective piece where you essentially have 2 circles on top of one another. So if you look at this fella up here climbing down the stairs, it's actually the same one as this one here. So it's a repeating motif. You could actually cut and paste this and stitch another one on top, and it would just endlessly, keep going into infinity. But he's a real master of perspective. One of my favorites, Stephen Wiltshire. Stephen is, well, he's our autistic savant. He has a photographic memory. So what he'll do is fly in a helicopter over a city, such as New York or Manhattan here, or over London, and then he goes back into his studio and with perfect precision will draw every door, every window, every little person he saw. So he's got some brain power that works beyond what ours does. To be able to photograph that in your mind, take a snapshot, and then just draw it out, pretty amazing. So I'll never be able to achieve exactly what he does. But here is one of mine. I consider myself a master of this stuff. This is a 5-point perspective piece I did, about 5 years ago. Just thinking about my life, how things are puzzling to me, that I'm always up and down, and I like to play guitar, and I like to draw, and I like to relax, and I like to work hard, and it's just my ups and downs. But I've done a lot of perspective pieces over the years. So long story short, you guys are in good hands. Now, lastly, if you like this stuff, you could just do it for me or do it because the state of Michigan says in its curriculum that you're supposed to learn about perspective drawing. Well, there's jobs out there. Like if you like doing this, yeah, you could be an architect. Most of this is done on the computer these days, but most times they start as drawings and sketches like this, where an artist will kind of get a vision of what it will look like before they head to the computer and do the CAD work. You could design computer games, video games if that's your thing. Here's one from Sim City. It's a 2-point perspective drawing. Here's another very crude, 2-point perspective, Minecraft. But imagine some of the other, games you might play, Fortnite or any single shooter games, that kind of stuff. Like there has to be believable backgrounds. So if you can do that in a sort of a virtual world or digitally, there's people willing to pay you big bucks. Interior designers, these folks know how to draw using perspective. You can't just draw a flat, one-dimensional kind of space. You have to make it believable and sell that to the client. So if you can draw and you understand vanishing points, you could make some money. Really, any kind of product. If you're going to design a chair or a desk or a camera or a car, whatever it is, you're going to have to understand perspective. So if designing things, inventing things is on your radar, then this unit is for you. It's just going to take your drawing skills to the next level. It goes on and on. You could do set designs or storyboarding, or if you're into anime and manga and cartooning, graphic novels, well, sure, maybe you draw the characters a lot, and that's great, but these characters need a believable space to live in. So I hope you guys are jazzed about this project. I hope you really put your heart into it, because it can offer you a lot of possibilities as far as jobs and making your artwork better. So that's all I've got for you for today. See you next time.